Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. Scott Reiss, the voice of the Stanford Cardinals, formerly with ESPN, NBCSN, and KTVU. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure, no problem.
I want to start off with first, how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, this is something that has impacted our lives both professionally and personally this last year. So, how have you been handling this past year?
It's been really weird, which is not really not a revelation. I don't think it's been weird for everybody. But from a broadcasting standpoint, could not have ever seen this coming. Calling games from my living room, not something I ever expected to be doing. And while there are some kind of neat little nuances of being able to be in a t-shirt and sweatpants if you want to, and not have any commute time, and all the little benefits of doing that sort of thing from home, I'm over it. It's much more fun and much more practically rewarding to do games when you can actually see the action. So it's been strange. We're adapting, and hopefully these last couple of basketball games will be the last ones I ever do from my living room, and we can go back to sort of broadcasting normal come the fall.
For sure. Well, let's go back to more happier times. You are a graduate of Stanford. When did you know you wanted to become a sportscaster?
I was lucky. I went to high school. The high school I went to in Los Angeles had a broadcast journalism class, which I took as a senior, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, wow, how cool would this be to actually do this for a living? So when I went to Stanford, I had an idea that, if I found something else that I like better, then I'd go that route. And if not, I would give it a shot. And, oddly enough, I didn't find anything more fun than, talking about sports for a living. So I just sort of went after it, and I spent pretty much my entire career as a TV sports anchor reporter. Only got into play-by-play with Stanford, 7-8 years ago. But small market TV, a couple of different jobs. Eventually wound up back in the Bay Area, which is second home for me. The first being LA, but obviously going to college up here in Northern California, this was sort of 1B. So great to get back here, and even better when I was able to get the Stanford gig a few years after moving back.
And you spent 8 years at ESPN, which included Sports Center, Baseball Tonight, ESPN News. What are some of your favorite memories at ESPN?
The caliber of television that I experienced there, having been at a bunch of different venues, between local and regional and national TV, it's on another planet. The level of talent at ESPN, and I don't just mean the guys you see on camera, but I mean the behind the scenes people, the producers, the directors, and even the research staff and people like that. It's otherworldly. The support staff, everything just puts you in a position where you can do incredibly high-level TV, and it's super cool to experience that because I just don't think there's anything else like it. Doing Baseball Tonight for a couple of years was a dream for me because I grew up, baseball was my favorite sport growing up, and to, actually host shows with Oral Hershiser and Bobby Valentine and Harold Reynolds and all the guys that you grew up kind of watching play ball, and to be able to host with them was again just kind of a dream come true. So I had a blast. I mean, I could talk for 3 days about the all the ins and outs of ESPN, but and I will say, just because it has to be noted, the first time you sit in the Sports Center chair to do that show is obviously, one of those moments you'll never forget. So again, I could go on forever, but it was an awesome experience. I was there the perfect amount of time because for a Southern California kid, Bristol, Connecticut was not a permanent location for me, but 8 years was enough. I got to do everything in the building really that I set out to do, and it got me back to California with Comcast Sportsnet starting up there, or now it's called NBC Sportsnet. But it sort of got me back where I wanted to go. So I couldn't be happier about my ESPN experience.
That's awesome to hear. And I was wondering, how did this opportunity open up to come back to Stanford, and what was so enticing about it? I have to imagine it being your alma mater played a big factor in that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I called games when I was a student, much like I'm sure you're doing now. I called games for the student radio station when I was at Stanford. I did a lot of basketball, a lot of baseball there. And I had been in the Bay Area. I had been back for about 5 years. And Dave Fleming, who you probably know is a big-time play-by-play guy for ESPN, and he's also one of the play-by-play broadcasters for the Giants, for San Francisco Giants. Dave's another Stanford guy. He's a friend of mine, and he got to a point where he was doing Stanford, and he just couldn't do it anymore because of his other commitments with the Giants and with ESPN. So he told me he was going to have to walk away from it, and I went after it. It obviously helped that I was an alum. It helped that I was already local. I had a lot of things in my corner. I had done a little bit of play-by-play, but not a ton. I had probably called, I don't know, 6 or 7 games, for radio or TV in my life in terms of professionally. So, I didn't know that I would get it, but I went after it and I got it. And it changed my life completely because that forced me to walk away from the full-time TV job at Comcast Sportsnet. And then I wound up, hooking up with KTVU, which is the local Fox affiliate, and sort of backfilling there. And that was pretty much my existence for 6 or 7 years was, part-time Stanford play-by-play, part-time sports anchor reporter here at local Fox.
And I was wondering, how do you describe working with David Shaw in more personal settings? I mean, here's a guy who's a well-respected coach in college football in the Pac-12. You get to experience working with him in more personal settings. How do you describe Coach Shaw when you get to interact with him one-on-one?
He's exactly the same. What you see publicly is exactly the same guy that we see behind the scenes. I think he is maybe a little bit more relaxed, when you get him, on a team charter, you're talking to him in an airport. I think that it's a little bit different than he is with the media in terms of direct answering questions and that sort of thing. But he's the same guy. He's so eloquent. He is such a tremendous ambassador for Stanford. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better face of the franchise, so to speak. And obviously his national reputation, belies that. So it's great. I mean, it's been, look, I am really lucky not only to call games for my alma mater, but to have come on board when they were still a top 10 program, and I got to call Rose Bowls and that sort of thing. So it was a bigger bonus, that the timing of it, the fact that I got the job, the team was so good, and obviously David Shaw is a big part of that.
What are some of your favorite memories behind the mic for the Cardinals?
Wow. So Christian McCaffrey is probably at the center of a lot of them, which is not surprising. The Rose Bowl win over Iowa, when he took the first play from scrimmage on a little Texas route, out of the backfield, caught the ball 10 yards downfield and ran another 45 for a touchdown on the first play. And then, we went on to, I think we were up 21-0 after 3 series, and the game was pretty much over. So I think that's certainly one. I have never seen a better college football player than Christian McCaffrey. Again, that's one thing that sticks in my mind. I guess I can't go back to Andrew Luck because I wasn't calling games then, but watching him, I was covering him for TV, and I was in Glendale for the Fiesta Bowl, his last collegiate game, and it was a performance I will never forget, watching this guy go. I think he was 27 of 29 in regulation. They wound up losing in overtime missed a couple of kicks, but in regulation he was 27 for 29, and it wasn't dink and dunk. He was throwing the thing 20, 30 yards downfield. And I just thought to myself, this guy's a Hall of Famer, not just an NFL star, but a Hall of Famer. And unfortunately, he wound up retiring early. We'll never know if he would have gotten to that point. But so that's another one. And then on the basketball side, I got to call Dejon Davis, who's still on the team, but 3 years ago, or I guess it was 2 years ago, as a sophomore, he hit a 52-footer at the buzzer to beat USC. And not everybody gets to call one of those in their careers. So that was a ton of fun and got a lot of national publicity and whatnot. So that sticks in my mind as well.
And I was going to ask you about a couple of Stanford players, and you mentioned them right off the bat, CMC. Do you have a great story about him? I mean, I'm sure you can mention something on the field, but interacting with him off the field in a personal setting, is there anything great you could share about CMC?
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying I actually live an hour from Stanford, so I am not there every day. I don't get to interact with these guys on a day-to-day basis, but I do travel with them. Obviously, I'm on the charter and I'm on the road, so I probably have more access than most media members and fans. But it's not like I can't say Christian and I were hanging out having dinner every night. But I will say that I had my kids with me once at Stanford, and he, just the way he interacted with them to stop and take pictures and sign autographs and just chit chat, really showed me that he was the complete package, right? This was not a prima donna by any stretch. He was just a really good, regular dude who happened to have, ungodly talents, right, in college football. And then after he had left, he was already in the NFL, but basketball was playing at Colorado, and you probably know Christian is from the Denver area, and he came to Boulder in his offseason to be the honorary captain for the Stanford basketball team. And just hearing his sort of pregame speech and the way he riled up the basketball players, and how impressed they were with a guy who 2 years ago had been their peer and he was some of their classmates, but now he's this professional football star and coming back and just so relatable still in everything that he said. So that really resonated with me as well.
What about Dalton Schultz? He's a tight end for the Cowboys. He also went to Stanford. Anything you remember about Dalton Schultz?
Yeah, another really good dude. Dalton, local kid, if I remember correctly, as well. He's good player, getting the most out of his abilities, which is, something you always want to see. I figured he was an NFL tight end, but he was one of those guys where you weren't sure exactly where he fits in. Is he going to be one of those guys who, is in the league for 2-3 years and kind of fizzles, or is he going to be a guy who's in it for the long haul? And now seeing him get his chance with Dallas and really take advantage with the tight end opening and the vacancy there, he had a fantastic season last year and has sort of catapulted himself into a legitimate starting NFL tight end. So I can't, I didn't know Dalton that well off the field, so I can't give you any great poignant personal stories, unfortunately. And again, as I mentioned, you're talking about, there's 100 football players every year, and we're adjacent to them. When I say we, I mean the broadcasters. We are adjacent to them, but we are not necessarily intermingling all the time. So, sorry, I don't have any great personal stories about Dalton, other than to say when I did talk to him, totally nice guy, liked him a lot, and glad to see him succeeding.
Well, how about Austin Hooper on the field? Do you remember anything about watching him on the field, just in terms of his talent? And obviously now he's a key player on the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, Hooper is a guy who I was pretty certain was going to be a factor at the next level. Just dripping with talent. He was a guy who, quite frankly, we lost a year of Austin Hooper. He redshirted his freshman year, and man, we needed him, because that was the one season, and if you're familiar at all with Stanford, that Cardinal tight ends have been pretty darn good over the last 15-20 years. There's a whole lot of them in the NFL. But there was one season right there in the middle, and it was Austin Hooper's true freshman year, where we had nothing at that position. We had a couple of converted defensive linemen trying to catch passes, and I think one of them finished with 5 catches on the season. The other had 2, something like that. And we had Austin Hooper, a future NFL, star, on the roster, and he redshirted, and he wound up staying, 2 more years and then leaving after his junior year. So I remember watching Austin Hooper in practice thinking, man, this guy's really good. He can help us right now. And, unfortunately, they had made the decision not to play him that first year. But then when he got on the field, the talent was unmistakable. Just a tremendous route runner, great hands, a little bit Zach Ertz-esque, but a slightly different player. But yeah, undeniable talent, and another guy who I had every suspicion was going to be an NFL success story.
And then on the basketball side, Stanford went to the Sweet 16 in 2014. How do you describe what it's like to cover a March Madness team? And I'm sure for you, it's got to be one of the most exciting events in all of sports.
It is, and in fact, it is my favorite event in all of sports. So to be able to, and certainly and anybody who's college sports fans knows how much fun it is just to follow your team in March Madness. So for me, to be able to go back, especially after Stanford had that incredible 15-year run, which I just missed. I was doing the games in college up until '94, and then it was '95 when they started their run of 14 NCAA tournaments in 15 years. And then right when I came back to Northern California, it's when they sort of tailed off a bit. So it was a bummer for me to kind of miss out on that heyday of Stanford basketball. And so when they went back there that year, I mean, look, just calling an NCAA tournament game is phenomenal. And then, oh, by the way, you win the first round game, which is great. You get to the second round, and then Stanford, as a number 10 seed, played the number 2 seed, Kansas, and they beat them. And so you're upsetting a 2 seed, and all the jubilation of going to the Sweet 16. It was an unbelievable experience, and it frustrates me that we haven't been back since. But that's an entirely different story.
For sure. And Scott, I've talked to Tony Castricone from Washington and Josh Lewin from UCLA, and they maintain that the Pac-12 has the best places to travel in terms of the cities. I mean, you've got LA, you've got the Bay Area, you've got Colorado. I mean, what are some of your favorite places to travel in the Pac-12, whether it's the stadium or the actual city to just go out and check out after a game?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would agree. Of course, I'm also biased. They probably are too, being at least Josh being a West Coast guy. But I grew up in LA, so for me, just the LA trips every year are probably my favorite, just because I get to go home and see friends and family and hang out for a few days. But in terms of the excitement of being in new and different places, I love Seattle. I love going up there. Once for football, it's every other year, and for basketball, it's every year. I love Phoenix, partially because in a bunch of those years, I got to piggyback and do some spring training while I was there. So it's a ton of fun covering basketball when even in Northern California, it's, it can be cold and dreary and 48 degrees in February, and you get to go to 80-degree Phoenix and watch some spring training baseball and call your hoops games. So that was pretty high on my list. I think that Boulder, Colorado is an awesome little town, and the football stadium is phenomenal. It may be my favorite stadium in the Pac-12, and it's kind of a real well-kept secret, I think, nationally, just how cool and quaint that stadium is. We've gotten to make a couple of awesome road trips that aren't in conference during my tenure, I guess, the last 8 years. First of all, Notre Dame, obviously. I'm fortunate that Stanford plays Notre Dame, so every other year we go to South Bend, and I don't need to tell you how cool that is to call a game from that stadium. We played at Army the first year that I was doing Stanford football, and that should be a bucket list trip for everybody. If you get a chance, go see the campus there at West Point. Absolutely beyond cool. Just the history. If you can get yourself a tour, even better. And the football stadium was just the icing on the cake. Just a beautiful view of the Hudson River, and so that was great. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say going to the Bahamas a couple of years ago to call games was pretty cool. We have been playing that basketball tournament, the Thanksgiving tournament down there. So obviously that was phenomenal. Battle for Atlantis. We were supposed to go to Maui this year, and I had Maui Invitational. That was circled on my calendar for like 5 years. And of course, COVID hits, and the thing is played in Asheville, North Carolina, and we don't even travel this year. So that kind of went out the window. But back to your original question, I think the Pac-12. My favorite cities to visit, other than LA again is the hometown, but I would definitely say Seattle and Phoenix are my favorite of the cities that we go to regularly. Stadiums, basketball, it's McHale Center in Tucson. Football, it's probably Colorado, although Autzen Stadium is super cool as well in Oregon, in Eugene. Gosh, I mean, there's so many. I could leave out 10 others that are phenomenal. Pauley Pavilion, just because of the history. I don't think aesthetically it's among my top 5, but because I grew up in Los Angeles and the history of UCLA basketball, and I went to games as a kid, so calling games down there at Pauley, that has to be mentioned, I think, as well.
That's great to hear. And I wanted to ask you, Scott, about college football. I mean, it really seems like since the implementation of the college football playoff, we've really only had a few teams that you really feel like have a chance to win it. The Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States of the world. And then you've got a lot of programs, even prestigious programs like Stanford, like Virginia Tech, on the outside looking in. Do you think college football has a parity problem? And if so, is there any way to change it, or is it just a matter of, look, Alabama and Clemson are going to continue to recruit the best players, and it's up to schools like Stanford, like Virginia Tech, to eventually over-recruit them and overtake them in the process?
You know, it's funny. I sense a little frustration in that question, and I share your frustration. I'm right there with you. I do think college football has a parity problem. It's not hurting the national brand because, you know, ESPN is loving the big boys at the top and just sort of riding the coattails. So I don't think the sport is necessarily suffering, but I can tell you that there are fans in a whole lot of college towns around the country that are pretty fed up watching the same teams every single year and knowing that it's going to be, you know, a combination of, you know, 2 or 3 teams that are almost cemented every year. And then you have maybe a rotation of Georgia, Oklahoma, whoever, you know, the team du jour that may battle Notre Dame, whoever it is that'll battle for that 4th spot. So, yeah, I don't like the system. And, you know, you can't change the way it's recruited. And you certainly can't, you know, limit the number of 5-star kids that are going to choose Clemson or Alabama. But what you can do is change the playoff system. And I am a huge proponent of going to 8 teams. I think that for me, it's an absolute no-brainer that you have 8 teams in the college football playoff. You have the 5 power conferences. You have 1 group of 5 team, and you have 2 at-larges. And that way, everybody's represented. And it also gives one more opportunity for a Virginia Tech or a Florida or an Oregon, whoever it may be, in that 6 or 7 or 8 spot to maybe knock off Clemson or Alabama and give you some new blood playing for a championship. So I'm a big fan of expanding the field. I don't think you can go crazy. I think 8 is probably the reasonable limit, but for me, that's the perfect number. And I think it'll get there. It just may take a few years.
That's definitely a point I agree with. And I wanted to ask you, Scott, how do you prepare for a game? I mean, let's say you have a Stanford-UCLA football game on Saturday. How are you preparing the week leading up to the game to get ready for your broadcast? And how does that differ when it comes to basketball?
Well, so in terms of logistics, X's and O's, I subscribe to a service called Broadcaster's Edge, free publicity, and that is a roster program that essentially downloads rosters, stats, and you can upload the stats, you know, daily or weekly or whatever you need. So, you know, it allows you, say, for football it will give you the entire roster for whatever team you need, and you drag them onto the positions on the field on the 2 deep, you know, the quarterback, the running back, the receivers, linemen, et cetera, et cetera. And so it essentially prints out the boards for you, but it leaves you the opportunity to fill in notes under individual players and team notes, so you can sort of fill in the information manually. So that's how I prepare kind of visually. And the other thing I do is I will always watch at least the most recent game of the opponent. You know, Stanford's easy. Once you do one team over and over and over, there's not a ton of prep work. But, you know, whether it's UCLA or USC or, you know, Northwestern or whoever you may be playing, you know, I will try to watch their most recent game just to sort of get myself familiar with the players, hear some other backstories, and make it more instinctive. You know, I'm not a guy who likes to rely on spotters. You know, when a pass is complete to number 14, I want to know who number 14 is instinctively. So watching the previous week really helps me do that. Basketball is similar, but it's easier because there's a lot fewer players on the field, right? A lot fewer players. For basketball, you can pretty much memorize the entire roster going in, and you certainly have the top 8 or 9, the rotational guys, you know, committed to memory before you do a game. So, you know, hoops is a little bit easier. It's a little bit less in terms of prep work, but I guess that's kind of the basic mechanism I use.
Scott, what's your advice to aspiring sportscasters trying to make it during this pandemic? I mean, you know better than anyone, it's already a competitive business, and now we have to deal with the realities of this pandemic. So what's your advice to young guys and girls like me who want to make it to doing something like what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, advice has always been so critical for young adults trying to get into this business because, as you mentioned, it's so absurdly competitive. And I think people probably understand that it's a competitive industry, but I don't think people understand how hard it is to break into broadcasting. And so you throw the pandemic in and it's just an entirely different level. You know, I think my basic advice has always been get on air any way you can, as soon as you can, in as many ways as you can. The question that I always got, back at ESPN, there were people who were, thinking about, do I apply for a production assistant job? I'm 22, I'm graduating college, I want to get into sports broadcasting. Should I, go be a PA at ESPN where I can be around the best and I can learn from the best and I can see how the best is done? Or should I go to, Butte, Montana and start my career and go be a sports reporter? And 1,000 times out of 1,000, it would be go to Butte, Montana. You need to be on air because as much as you may have talent, there is no substitute for repetitions. I mean, that's what it is. You can learn how to do this, but without actually doing it over and over and over and over and over again, you just can't get to where you want to go. So I guess, the pandemic makes it more critical for people like you doing the right thing. You're doing podcasts, you're doing interviews, you're honing the skills as much as you possibly can, even before you're ready to get out into the workplace. So for me, that's first and foremost. And obviously, I could give you specific advice for, a play-by-play or a sports anchor or a sports reporter. They're all different, and then they're different skill sets. But in terms of just the general advice, it's do it as much as you possibly can because there's absolutely there's nothing better than experience, and it's just so critical to get those reps.
And you also call radio football and radio basketball. What would be the key piece of advice if you're going to talk to someone who has never done play-by-play on the radio for either of those sports or is going in after only doing it a few times? What are some key pieces of advice you say this person has to know before going in and doing that broadcast?
Yeah, it's funny because I've thought about that question a lot less than I have on the TV side because, as I said earlier, most of my career was spent in the studio doing, as TV sports anchor, and I could, give you, 20 things off the top of my head in terms of my growth and how I got better doing that. For me, play-by-play was something that I think I had a knack for, but I had only dabbled, and I went after the Stanford gig because it was the right place at the right time and the right school, and I wound up getting it, and I think I kind of honed my craft as I was doing it. It was, sort of trial by fire. I don't have the laundry list of kind of, what to do as a 22-year-old trying to break into play-by-play as I might for TV. But that said, know your stuff. I mean, it seems obvious, but the more knowledge you have of the teams you're going to be watching instinctively, the better it comes across. There's nothing more frustrating to me than listening to broadcasters call a football game, and every time a visiting player catches a pass, they have no name because the broadcaster doesn't know who it is. Mississippi receiver catches the ball, he's at the 50 and he's out of bounds, and that's a first down. He's nameless because the guy didn't do his homework because it was the other team and he didn't bother studying. And that drives me crazy. I think if you want to sound intelligent, you want to sound crisp, and you don't want to have to stop and look it up. So the more that you familiarize yourself, again, it's such an obvious tip, but the more you familiarize yourself with the teams that you're going to be calling, it helps so much on so many levels, just in terms of kind of the smoothness and that sort of thing. Read the media guide, learn, a tidbit or two about the relevant players. You're not going to, you're not going to go look up tidbits on the third string long snapper of every team because you never have time to eat meals and sleep. But, of the 10 best players or 12 best players on a football team that are likely to touch the ball and that might make a play or might get hurt or might do something that merits discussion, you can throw in a really interesting fact about the guy, and they're always in media guides. That is good broadcasting, right? It's good for conversation. It's good to switch it up from just down and distance, here's the play, first and 10, down and distance, here's the play, second and 3. It's just to sort of mix it up a little bit and inject some personality. Because I think that's something that's hard to do when you're learning play-by-play. It's tough enough to just call the action and be good at it, but to also have personality and be able to have that balance, I think, is a real skill. So, just, again, more information, I think, allows you to broaden that skill set and make you better at calling games.
Scott, you've been so gracious with your time, so I have one final question for you, and that is, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? I mean, you're in your home state calling games for your alma mater, Stanford. You've already done a number of events for reputable networks like ESPN and NBCSN and KTU, VU. I mean, is there anything you want to do in 10 years, maybe an event you want to call, or right now you're just happy to be working for your alma mater and kind of just staying in the moment?
Another great question. I am so fortunate that I kind of got to where I wanted to go when I was 29. When I got to ESPN, that was, the pinnacle for me of the broadcast world. So once you check that off the list, I think you start to recalibrate a little bit. And it's no longer a question of, I really want to be a national broadcaster because I've done that. Or I really want to cover a team and do pre and post game for that team. I've done that, and now do it play-by-play for my alma mater. So for me, it is now a question of what is best for quality of life and best for my family. It's no longer just about career goals and aspirations for me. It is about, where is, the next best opportunity that will be good for. I have two kids. One is 10, one is 12. That's going to be good for the family. If I make another move, and I don't know that I will, but if I do make another move, it will be for a really good TV job in a really desirable location where I feel that I can be for, the long term. I've done the moving around thing, and I don't have any interest in doing it anymore. So, I think for me, there are two possibilities. One of them I just gave you, for 10 years down the line, if there's some, really great opportunity that works financially and that works geographically and that is, works for family purposes. And the other possibility is that I'm exactly where I am right now, still calling Stanford games, doing something else TV-wise to supplement that, and trying to figure out how you can, continue to pay the ridiculous cost of living in Northern California. So I think for me, those are the two options, and that's kind of what I'm, kind of weighing as we go forward.
Scott, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you about your career, about your time at Stanford, and just all the different players and coaches you've met. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a real pleasure.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Hope it helps.
That's Scott Reiss, the voice of the Stanford Cardinals, formerly with ESPN and NBCSN and a host of other networks. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.